In the 2 weeks since they were last with you, our critics have been to Juilliard to hear Beveridge Webster play Ravel, to the 46th Street Theater to see Private Lives, and they've read John Wayne's new biography of Samuel Johnson. I'm Harold Hayes with Alex Cockburn, the journalist, Ned Rorem, the composer, and Jack Richardson, the author, and this is Critics' Night at the Round Table. Alex, you are too young to have seen too many revivals of Private Lives, but it's your nomination, so you start with the play.
Well, Private Lives by Noel Coward was first written in 1930. And it's amusing, I just happened to look up what a famous British critic said in 1930. He was saying, what will the young critics of the 50s say about Noel Coward? And he answered his own question, of course. And he said, within a few years, the student of drama will be sitting in complete bewilderment before the text of Private Lives, wondering what on earth those fellows in 1930 saw in such a flimsy trifle. And Coward himself, a lot of reference books you see here today.
Coward, refreshing, go ahead.
What? Coward himself said, it's a reasonably well-constructed duologue for two experienced performers with a couple of extra puppets thrown in to assist the plot and to provide contrast. As a complete play, it leaves a lot to be desired. Well, of course, the critics of the 50s were watching Noel Coward, and so were all the audiences of the 50s, and people are still watching him. And I thought this performance of the play was quite good. I don't think it was absolutely wonderful. And the basic plot, I mean, as we know, is of the four people, the old experienced people who've been married before, and the two new people they've married living side by side, who then finally split up and the old people get together again, it's a very cynical play, I think. And it's odd to think that if you slowed it up a bit and made it more solemn, it would become much more contemporary in the heavier sense of the word, the idea of people being unfaithful, of not really standing each other, of getting away from each other, and so forth. But Coward, of course, always kept things very, very light, which is the reason why people never took him very seriously. And I thought, looking at this production, that there were lines in it, which is, you quite often felt that Coward was flirting with quite serious ideas. I mean, one of the lines is, I think very few people are completely normal, really, deep down in their private lives, which, of course, gives the play its title. And you constantly feel Coward is sort of edging his way towards the idea of the pain of living together and so on. But, of course, you can't say that's what the play is about, because the pace of it never allows you that dimension. And really, a lot depends on how the performers operate in it. And, of course, I suppose the main star of this one is Maggie Smith as Amanda, who is the sort of experienced woman who has been married to Elliot and has now arrived with her appalling second husband. And I thought her performance was fairly good, except she assumed a rather odd accent at times, which I couldn't quite understand. I don't know what...
Very nasal and very broad,
nasal. And she said, I mean, she'd say a word like sacrilegious. She'd say it's sacrilegious, rather like that. Now, that's either a slightly lower class accent in England or it's a slightly New Zealand accent. And I was somewhat at a loss. I don't know what you fellows thought about it, but I thought the way she said some of those words was bizarre, because you'd think normally the way people do those Private Lives voices is in a rather sort of light, rather airy way, rather like the man, John Standing, and the way he did it. And therefore, that was slightly puzzling, but I thought the style, the way it carried through was very nice. It's just nice to watch the play again, and to think it is actually an extremely good play. I really think that.
I think that Alexander is always very brilliant at seeing things in plays that aren't there, or else, because I have a very narrow imagination, if any at all, and I take exactly what I see at face value. Also, I don't often go to the theater, but I still labor under the delusion that was ingrained in my childhood that the theater has something to do with culture. And then I go to the theater and I find that it doesn't, especially the matinee audience that I was at with those laugh track programmed, mediocre, I was going to say women, I should say people, laughing at these what they think of as upper class jokes. I found it very, very, very depressing. Maggie Smith, I think, is terrific. I like her accent and the secret upper accent to my American ears. And it's one that I wish singers with their bad diction would follow, because singers are inclined to get bogged down in vowels.
But she puts space between the vowels.
Yeah, and she hangs on to a consonant. It can't be done, but she does it. I don't want to. She's just like Betty Davis, but you get every single word.
Well, I agree with Alex, though. I don't think her accent, her voice, was right for that. I mean, the language is not meant to be treated that way. It's not that sort.
But she varied herself, didn't she? I mean, sometimes she was talking in that ordinary way, then sometimes she went into this rather odd voice like that.
Well, I mean, it's upper-class badinage, that whole play. I mean, and if it's not spoken that way, the lines musically
It's
seem to
pseudo-upper-class badinage. Upper-class people, even in Noah Coward's, I'm sure didn't talk that way.
Well, Noah Coward himself was somewhat middle-class in
No, I
background.
mean,
I
no,
suppose
no,
it was
no,
your point there about people thinking it was
Yeah, Noah
upper-class
Coward is a genteel middle-class English background, but the play, it seems to me, it affects that notion, and deals. You know, when you talk about private lives in the title of the play, I mean, that these lives are so private. I mean, that's what's interesting about it, because I don't think you could ever. No one. That is almost the definition of a trifle. When you write about lives so private as these lives, they have no social function. They have nothing to do, really, but to have their love affairs break up and go to China, go to Yorkshire, and come back together, have another love affair, break up again. Because there's nothing pressing them. The people who represent life are the dullards. They come in and they're burdened down with problems and difficulties.
The French maid.
Yes, you know, they're out in the ordinary world, but our hero and heroine don't have anything to do but deal with each other's peculiarities, which comes from having an independent income and not much interest in anything
Well, wasn't that
else.
all a deliberate conceit on his
Yes,
part?
and it's a delightful conceit. I mean, I wish there was-
1930, you see, an odd year for
No,
a thing like...
Oscar Wilde did it.
Oh, yes, but Oscar Wilde wasn't writing just after the Great Crash. I mean, it's a very odd time for the play to come out. I mean, a thing is...
Fado did it.
Yeah. I think it's nice, that fast thing, and I don't know what you think now, though.
Except he didn't carry it through. It's the first act is very contrapuntal and offers all sorts of possibilities. And I thought the second act really degenerated. It became very boring. I remember I saw Tallulah do it. Did you ever see her do it? And it was a far more physical thing with what she did with Donald Cook. I mean, when they hit each other in battle, they really hit each other in battle. And when they made love, they really did it. 40s though it was.
Well, Brian Bedford did it last with Tammy Grimes, I guess.
Brian Bedford with Tammy Grimes, I saw that production, which was very good. The play is almost foolproof if you have some, I mean, competence up there.
The double take, I thought, was extraordinary of Maggie Smith's right at first, you know, when she looked across the shrubbery and saw
Her former
Elliot, the
husband sitting
husband,
there.
because she literally leaped across the stage. You know, she looked around and then she just bounded across. I thought it was
And her
stunning.
timing was very good. I mean, obviously, in moments like that. I mean, what's odd to think is that somehow people could write fast there without getting sort of worried about it. But now, as I say, if you took away some of the pace, I mean, all this thing about people sitting divorced from social actuality, you could imagine how ponderous that would become. Where if you put them all in barrels like Beckett or something, you could easily make it into a sort of thing about the torture of the human cell and the failure of all human relationships. But
Well,
the nice thing was the card like...
came back into fashion, didn't he, in England, when, after being out of fashion.
Well, of course,
for
he
a
was
long time.
brutalised by the angry young man who said he was a horrible old romancer of social conditions and he lacked relevance. And then they read their
Yes,
relevant plays.
but when the theatre of the absurd came in, I think he was.
Then everybody said he's not so bad.
But
But
they imitated him quite a Edward Albee imitated Noah Coward quite a bit. And when people
Does
die...
he acknowledge that?
It doesn't make any difference. Artists themselves never know who influences them, but outsiders know who influenced them. We know that that thing took place. Influences are... An artist himself is the last one to know who his influences are because he tries to hide them. So maybe he knows it, maybe he doesn't, but we can tell him if the occasion arises. I think the nice thing is that Noah Coward, now that he's dead, so often when people die, they're buried and that's it. But he's been revived. He's something that America has never produced, which is a jack of all trades. America has no real Renaissance men, and he even one-ups the European Renaissance men in that he had a musical talent and was able to write long-lived pieces of music with that musical talent. Because Jean Cocteau didn't do that, Michelangelo didn't do that.
did he write The Room with a View for that? Presumably he wrote the tune of A Room with a View.
What do you mean Room with a
Well,
View?
the music that plays in the back of the play.
That's not Room with a View.
No.
That is...
I'll see you again.
I'll see you
I'll see you again. Is
I'll
it?
see you again. And that isn't his any more than In Blithe Spirit Always is not by him.
Oh,
That's
really?
why-
I thought I'll see you again was by him.
Well, Always is not by him, and that's why everyone has to pay all these copyrights.
Speaking music, because we must move on now,
Yeah.
the Ravel concert next,
Yes.
which was your suggestion, Ned.
It's sobering and extraordinary to think that the complete piano works of Ravel can conveniently fit into one evening's program, especially when you realize that Ravel, more than any composer since Liszt, added to the evolutionizing of keyboard virtuosity. so that I think that would be a generally accepted statement. And yet this evolution or revolution can all be fit so neatly in simply one program. Beveridge Webster isn't the only person who is doing all Ravel programs these days either. Gérard Suzet next week is going to do all of the vocal works of Ravel on one program. Queen's College just did 6 unearthed and hitherto unheard of works by Ravel, and they fit it into about 6 minutes. All of that compactness and totalness is very French, I think.
Is Giesecke's considered generally the best recording of?
Well, Giesecke, German that he was, and of course the French can't play their own music. It's always outsiders. It's like influences. People don't know their influences and they can't play their own music. You need another nationality. The best performers of French music have been either Americans, Poles, or Germans. Ravel would have been 100 next week because he was born in 1875 on the 100th birthday of Jane Austen, for whatever that may be worth.
That's very thoughtful of him, yeah.
Yeah. It's sort of amusing to locate. I was just thinking that Samuel Johnson was right exactly in between Bach and Mozart, for example.
Which affected him not at all.
The Mozart affected him a lot because he knew Mozart was going to be born.
Yeah.
Ravel wrote in his 62 years not more than 8 hours worth of music, as opposed to Debussy's 16 or Beethoven's 30 or Wagner's 60 or Charles Ives' 1,000. Ravel's centenary now. Is that the word centenary? We'll shove Charles Ives off the map, I'm glad to say. What can we say about Ravel? The only things that I would like to say about Ravel would be to debunk the general accepted ideas about him, namely that he is suave, sophisticated, witty, anti-sensual.
He was a music critic as well as a composer,
Not a very good, not
apparently.
particularly, no. Debussy was a good music critic, like Shaw, but Ravel was not an intellectual. In fact, I have the impression he might have even been slightly slow-witted as a human being. His private life was a big mystery. Nobody knows anything about him. And again, I feel that that's because there isn't much to know.
Alex, you were at the performance. What did you think of?
Well, I enjoyed the performance. Got a little dozy at times, must admit. I very much enjoyed hearing all the music. I mean, can I just ask you something? Did you say Beethoven's full music lasted how long?
More than, I mean, I don't know. I've never sat down and timed it.
Well, I thought you said 16 hours or something.
No,
You were
I would,
taken
no, with
aback.
him I would say about 30 hours.
Yes.
The farther we go back in history, the bigger a composer's catalog becomes
Yeah.
in just timing it by the clock.
Is it rare to have the complete work of Ravel played?
No, people have been doing it for a long time. It's a trick, but it's a trick that works.
Because the audience was very enthusiastic,
Yeah.
I thought.
I would like to ask you, who were there, but you're not practicing musicians, I go on the principle that everybody likes Ravel and nobody dislikes him and nobody really disapproves. I mean, people can hate Schoenberg, for example, or they can be bored by Bach, but there's a certain element in Ravel that seems to attract. You don't have to love him, but it seems to attract virtually everybody of every taste. Does he attract you, or does he just put you to sleep?
No, he doesn't put me to sleep. I won't say he's compellingly attractive to me, actually. I mean, I just quite enjoyed it. I felt, all right, I'm going to hear all the piano works, and there I'll be, and I'll listen to them. And I enjoyed it. The technical proficiency of the pianist, I can't really judge. Sometimes I was a little uncertain about some
Yes,
things he
that's
was
an
doing.
interesting question because I'm not that familiar with the total work, though I have a complete recording at home. And I was trying to measure how I could tell as a non-professional what distinctions existed between this particular performance and that I had on record. But it seemed to me that there's an extraordinary variety in his music from the beginning through to the last selection that was played. And,
Yeah, he
I
was a
found it
combination, he was the risky combination of being both witty and terrifically sexual, at least to me, far more than Debussy. And I think it's because because Debussy's music doesn't build in any orgasmic sense.
Did they influence each the other?
No, people are constantly comparing them, and they usually compare them to Ravel's disadvantage on the grounds that Debussy, who is a far more abstruse composer, and in a way a bit more difficult to the ear. But I don't think that because a composer is enjoyable, necessarily should denigrate his, or any art for that matter. The fact
Yeah.
that we enjoy it shouldn't make it lower class.
I think it's worth remarking, this is the second time we've been to Juilliard, the third, I believe,
Yeah.
that after 7:30, one can go in without paying. Am I
At
correct?
Juilliard?
I believe so. And as a matter of fact, I saw a lot of oldsters there that evening, because I arrived late, and they just simply opened the door, and these people went in. And
What do
it was
you
a
call
full
old?
house. Well, I'd say over 65.
Oh, okay.
Actually, over 48 is old as 49. So. But I do think that's an interesting aspect of the city, that this is there and it's available. I may be giving misinformation, but it seemed to me that there is a possibility to get
Well, if
into
you
the
are, a lot of
place.
people
after
get killed in the rush at the Juilliard tonight. You better get it right, huh?
Let's go to Jack's selection and Samuel Johnson. Before you start, may I simply read one sentence that I selected, not at random, but I would be interested in your comment, particularly since the author seems so concerned about the felicity of phrasing of Johnson throughout his writing. This sentence was, "The United States cavalry was just over the next hill in the shape of a posse of booksellers." This was Waine.
Mm. Oh, that's Waine. Yes. Well, do you think that's a bad sentence?
I would say that
Yeah.
that's a rotten sentence. Now, what do you have to say about the book?
Well, I think there are sentences like that in the book. There are times when Waine tries to be relaxed in his prose and I should call it democratic in his imagery. But that's not really the point of the book to me, because I think the biography that Waine wrote is a very good one. But
Are there many biographies of Johnson?
Well, of course, there's Boswell's.
Yeah, but I
famous
mean
one,
of this nature.
Yes, well, Joseph Wood Crouch wrote a biography of Johnson, I think, some 25 years ago, which was very good, which attempted to do what John Waine did and did it very well. It's just John Waine has more material, more scholarship has come to light about Johnson's life, and also Waine is a little more Johnsonian in his attitude than Crouch was. And it was this attitude that interested me. I mean, Johnson, as Waine says in his book, needs to be rehabilitated in some sense from the popular notion that he was a sort of literary John Bull, a Tory who mouthed dicta about literature or politics and ethics, morality, etc., without any based very much on Church of England notions and Christian principles and common sense. That was about as far as he went.
A great scholarship, though.
Well, the scholarship goes without saying, but it's not Johnson. Johnson was a much more complex person, of course, than that. And John Wayne's attempt, I think, to show Johnson as a human being that was fully aware of all the terrors and difficulties of existence, and someone who was by no means indifferent to human suffering, indeed embodied it in an extraordinary way, but who dealt with it in a manner that has come to seem has come to be unpopular in our literary figures. He did not complain about it. He did not demonstrate it. He did not go crazy. He had the misfortune, as John Waine points out, to have lost our romantic sympathy because he refused to give in to the pains, weaknesses, and doubts and fears that he had, and instead created an extraordinary amount of work and a principle of judgment and a principle of life that was, I would have to call it, I mean, that evinced how much he cared about the way he lived and died as a human being. And for that reason, if no other, I thought the biography was very interesting. Of course, there was another, many more reasons. One is that Johnson, I think, is perhaps one of the 2 or 3 great critics in English, and certainly deserves to be read and studied now, especially in terms of literary criticism, since it's become a very, well, what should I call it, sort of antic Philistinism, where everyone is trying to find a little niche, a corner where they can demonstrate their profundity, peculiarities, and novelty. Whereas Johnson sort of faced art as a representative of life. It's a direct confrontation, and he had the courage to quarrel with anything that he found offensive or which diminished life in any way.
How many people now do you think read Johnson? I was trying to think what people would most know. The Vanity of Human Wishes, the poem, the lives, the lives of the
I'd say
poets.
Lives of the Poets would probably
Have you read
most popular.
Irene?
Irene? Yes, I've read Irene. It's
Can we make a 5-act tragic opera from it, or is it dated
No,
beyond belief.
no, it's terrible.
It's terrible.
It's-
How about the poems?
The poems are not so good either. I mean,
So what would you isolate if you
I
were
would
to
say
isolate
the Rambler.
I wanted to read the
Rambler
Rambler after I
essays.
read the descriptions of that.
Certainly, the lives of the poets, if nothing else, would have made Johnson memorable.
What about his
for all
criticism of Shakespeare?
That too. And, if we could ever find a decent edition of it, the introduction to Shakespeare, his annotation of Shakespeare, and his criticism of Shakespeare is extraordinary. I mean, it presents a certain point of view, of course, and Coleridge, for example, took great exception to some of Johnson's remarks about Shakespeare, and I think criticized his poetry in a very funny way. I believe it is, I can't remember, it's a Vanity of Human Wishes, I believe it begins, let imagination with extensive view survey mankind from China, let observation with extensive view survey mankind from China to Peru. And Coleridge pointed out that for someone so precise with language as Johnson affected to be, that this is one long redundancy. It's like let observation with extensive observation observe mankind extensively. It's
God, you rattled that off quick. Did you have that ready there?
Oh, no, I've made that.
The dictionary, I thought the dictionary, I wouldn't mind a paperback of that dictionary coming out.
Yes, it's an.
I mean, first of all, it's extraordinary to think of a man spending, what, 8 years
Yes.
doing the dictionary. And secondly, it's almost impossible ever to find the dictionary. And thirdly, his definitions, a lot of them were rather funny. And that's if any paperback bookseller wants to lose a lot of money, why doesn't he do that?
I don't know. I've never seen an edition of it that didn't look like it had been bound in 1812 as the last.
stuff
The
is
Signet Complete Shakespeare paperbacks used Johnson's introductions, among others.
They do.
I thought the other thing it raised here was, that, I mean, this problem of the large biography. I was standing in a bookstore the other day and I met a seller from one of the publishing houses and I said, you know, trying to flog some books, Random House's books as a matter of fact, and I said, you know, what are people reading as the recession deepens and all this kind of thing? And she said biographies, just huge biographies, bigger the better. You can really snap people's wrists off.
A reason for this?
Well, I don't know. I was thinking about that. I mean, there's nothing I find. An English taste has been for very large biographies for a very long time.
And
they're
people
all
haven't read novels since the war.
not in great
Here.
profusion, exactly. And in England, novels sell, what, 3,000, I mean, unless they're bestsellers, but always at the top of all the list are these immense biographies. You know, Mary, Queen of Scots, Cromwell, there's two
Well, it might be that
contemporaries.
biographies serve that narrative function that the public wants.
And you ramble, and I can remember I had an obsession for them at one point, and there you kick off with the birth, usually with the grandfather's birth, and then you gradually work your way forward into it. 700 pages.
Well, I objected to that about this, starting with infancy and moving.
And you know,
just
my God, you've got 12 years
laboriously
of infancy before anything sort of
Yeah.
happens.
I felt
And that's a very
John
English
Waine
taste.
strongly throughout this book.
What, Ned?
Too. I felt the author himself as much as Johnson, as though he were. I mean, he came off as a very nice man, John Waine, and I'm not used to reading poets, the prose of poets, and I was a little apprehensive about his. But he wasn't poetistic as poets can often be when they write.
He's not that much of a
serious,
No, it's not really. He is a poet, but he's also
all
a
I've known
critic.
of his
He's also a critic and a
was
novelist.
poems.
So
He's sort of English, sort of.
But he's
not
deep.
that
He's
brilliant.
madly in love with Johnson. That's clear, and
He's
he's
had- yes.
inclined to. It's not for nothing that we have chosen three nice guys, as a matter of fact, to talk about Ravel and Noah Coward and Johnson. Johnson, did he know anything about things beside what he knew about? For example, he doesn't really, in spite of Joshua Reynolds, talk about art. He never talks about music. There's not one remark about music.
no, he didn't know anything about music that I know of.
Because there wasn't any music in England
Yes.
at that period.
And painting, he had a very commonsensical notion about, but
Very
never
common sense.
saw much of it because in those days one needed to travel, and I said we could never get out of there.
He's that sort of strain too. I mean, you said he gets away from the John Bull image, but the fact is a lot about Johnson, particularly, I don't know, in England, maybe he had the sort of bluff, rather strong personality with very strong, decided views, refuting the famous thing. I mean, he's famous for about three things. One is the joke about the dog, you know, walking on its hind legs, like a woman preaching joke, and then the other one is refuting Berkeley's philosophy by kicking a stone. And he's known for three of them, both of which are rather sort of brutal, not to say brutish remarks. And that sort of image of the sort of the man of letters, you know, who can...
Edmund Wilsonish.
well, I think Edmund Wilson was rather more, I mean, was a lot more intelligent than Johnson in many
But
ways.
John
I mean,
Wayne-
That's an interesting statement.
John Waine tones
More
all that
intellectual.
down. He'll have a long chapter, for instance, on the letter to Lord Chesterfield, which is
Well,
nothing.
that's a very famous letter.
It's a famous letter, and then he ends up by saying, without irony at all, that Johnson was a man incapable of holding a grudge. After this letter which is nothing if not the arch grudge of all time.
Yes, that was the
Or else
I don't
I
think
missed
that
the
was a
point.
grudge. That was just that letter.
Or to
That's
say the
a very
least.
famous letter. Because Johnson wrote to Lord Chesterfield, who had taken an interest in the dictionary and had been his patron, but had never given him anything, and for 9 years never
£10.
acknowledged
Give
him.
him
or
£10,
something.
yes.
Yeah, something like that. And then finally, when the dictionary was coming out and everyone was talking about it, he sort of let it be known that he was his sponsor and was dropping these hints. To which Johnson wrote this letter saying that you weren't my friend when I needed you. In effect, I don't need you now. And it's a sort of historical landmark.
What's the
as the
famous
book
remark? A
says.
patron is a man who waits till a nearly drowning man reaches shore and then encumbers him with help.
That's
Which
right.
I suppose is the
And
good
it sort of
definition.
marks the end of literary patronage in England. And after that, writers found different ways of making them. Making
Poets are
enough
just as
money.
bad off today as they were then. It's
Worse,
bemusing to-
probably.
yeah.
I don't know.
A poet in residence? What about a poet in residence at these universities? That's a little perk, isn't it?
Unless they act up, they don't get their. I mean, they're
That's the
supposed
way
to
for a
act
poet
rather
to make a
drunk
living
and
today,
crazy.
is a poet in residence. That's the way to make a living today as a poet. is
Yeah,
poet
but
in
they don't
residence
get
in
much
the
poetry.
university.
So I think we should think, what biographies are we all going to write as this recession comes along here?
Well, you all three apparently like this one.
Well, I did very much. I like John Wayne's. I like the fact that he identified with Johnson so strongly, and that he used Johnson and dealt with him biographically not only as an historical figure, but as a figure very much of our time.
Thanks, Jack. Ned's for, and Alex is against. Because of a special series we're planning for Pledge Week, our next Critics' Night will air on Wednesday, March 19th. At that time, Rorem, Richardson, and Cockburn will tell you what they think about the Cotton Club review that played last week at La Mama, the film Arthur Rubinstein, Love of Life, playing at the Festival Theater, and another film, Shampoo, which is playing at the Coronet. Thereafter, we'll return to our alternate Friday night schedule. Good night for Roundtable. I'm Harold Hayes.